I've always been in awe of how Shelley and Steven talked about him, his accomplishments as a pilot, as a leader, and his passion for helping grow and maintain a wonderful resource and legacy here at the CAF. How Shelley and Steven would light up every time they'd hear a plane or see one lofting overhead. Remembering their time in the air with their father, talking endlessly about the warbirds he'd fly and the air shows they'd attend with him. As I hear more and more about this man, I'm honored to have had him touch my life. Don't worry, Steve. I'll take care of your daughter. I promise to protect her and be the husband that you'd be proud of. I will be the brother to Steven that you'd want for him, helping him and his family as they were my own. We all will watch over LaTanya as well to help and support her through the next journey in her life. I know that Steve probably would want something a little more upbeat and comical today. So with that said, I wanted to get that out of the way. I did really find Steve's stubbornness intriguing. I think anybody here who knew him was one of his big traits that I kind of latched onto because I can be that way myself. I also was very interested in his passion for what he did as a pilot and what he's built here at the CAF. The stories he would tell, the conversations we'd have were always lighthearted and funny, with a little bit of cursing involved. So today is about Steve. Today is about remembering him as a person that he was, the legacy he's left, and the humor that he has obviously left a lot of us. So today we have a few people that we want to bring up to talk a little bit about Steve and tell us some of those stories. So Dustin is going to come up and give us some of his wonderful wisdom about Mr. Steve Barber, and hopefully we can all share in a little bit of laughter and a little bit of wonderful memories about Steve. So Dustin, would you come up here and say a few words for us?
Hi everyone. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name's Dustin Gelbard, a longtime friend of Steve's. My relationship with Steve was based largely on joking with each other. We usually made fun of each other. Steve had a great sense of humor, and usually our jokes were at each other's expense. I figured I might as well keep that theme going today. First, I'd like to speak and share some of my personal experiences with Steve. I first met Steve around 2006. My friendship with Ken Gottschall and Jason Soames eventually led me to the CAF through our mutual love of model and full-scale aviation. I started volunteering my free time for many years here. Prior to my first visit at the museum, I was spending my free time playing at Santa Paula Airport with my Lesko. I had already heard a great deal about Steve through Ken and Jason, and I wasn't even a member yet. Ken and Jason were spending all their free time at the CAF with a huge passion to fly these aircraft, and they talked a great deal about Steve. I kept hearing Steve this and Steve that. I heard about stories of Maydays and how he saved himself in the airplane. I heard about his lessons and his knowledge and how instrumental he was to the SoCal Wing. I knew so much without ever meeting him. They really looked up to him, and rightfully so. Ken started harping on me, telling me that I need to stop talking about it, hurry up, join the CAF, get over here and start volunteering. Not long after that talk, I decided to make the commitment. Ken said he'd introduce me around. For me, without putting a face to the name after hearing all these stories, well, let's just say I've got a overactive imagination. I was picturing Steve as this tall, good-looking John Wayne guy in a flight suit. Or maybe even Steve McQueen. So as Ken and I were walking up to the maintenance hangar, Ken pointed in a somewhat general direction and said, "Steve's right over there. Come on, I'll introduce you." So I started walking straight towards these two guys, and I walked right up to Gary Barber. You're welcome, Gary. Steve was standing next to him, smoking a cigarette with his typical pose. Well, everyone who knows me knows that once you get me started talking about airplanes, it's very hard to stop the momentum, or even if you just get me talking. As I'm sure it is true with most people who are friends with Steve, he and I hit it right off because he was affected by the same problem I have. Neither of us stopped talking. Having a friendship with Steve at the CAF was only the beginning of our friendship. Circa 2016, my automotive repair shop was so busy and out of my control that I just couldn't keep up with it. Finding good help was very tough. This is where I learned what Steve was really made of. By luck and coincidence, Steve had just retired from his full-time career. He didn't want to fully retire yet, he just wanted to retire from the line of work he was currently in. He was visiting with me at my shop while I looked at something on one of the Barber family cars, and he asked if I needed any part-time help. I said, yes, I do, badly. Steve began helping me 3 times a week. Sometimes these situations can turn out pretty bad, mixing friendship and business. It didn't. Steve was great. We never had a bad day together. He was always early to work, hardworking. He never said no to a task. He was great with customers. Every one of my customers loved Steve. He made them all feel right at home. I would say Steve and I were pretty good friends from the CAF, but we became great close friends working together during this period of time. I've always loved World War II history. He and I had that very much in common. I loved everything about it since I learned about radio-controlled warbirds as a young child. That's where it started, and it hooked me. It was the doorway in. It has been an insatiable thirst for me to learn more and be part of it by helping preserve that history. Steve and I saw that in each other, which made for great conversations that would last for hours. Airplanes are my favorite part, but I never missed an opportunity to learn more about this time in history. That's what made all my work lunches with Steve so special. To be able to hear his stories and pick his brain was absolutely priceless. One-on-one time with Steve Barber. When I was about 16 years old, circa 1996, I visited the Santa Monica Museum of Flying. My best friend Chris and I were walking around taking pictures of everything. We had a docent take a picture of both of us standing in front of Cottonmouth, David Price's P-51. I was obsessed with the airplane. It was my first time seeing a Mustang in person. I was in complete awe. I've kept that photo all these years. Thanks to Steve Barber, I now have a picture of me after going flying in it when the plane visited the CAF. My first ever Mustang ride was with Steve in that Mustang. Now I'll always have both of those memories and photos. There may be some disagreement with this next one, but a longtime friend of Steve's and mine once said to me about 15 years ago, if you can't get along with Steve Barber, then you're probably the problem. And I see Latanya is probably making faces at me somewhere. I can't remember why he said it to me at that moment. I just never forgot him saying it. Some things just stay with you. Personally, for me, with my relationship with Steve, that statement is just very true. Steve was very easy to get along with and very humble given his accomplishments. My girlfriend Bree noticed something about Steve that I didn't notice on my own for whatever reason, or I just didn't pay attention to it. We were at the Reno Air Races. Steve was sitting on a golf cart. As Bree and I walked up to him, he instantly stood and insisted Bree take his seat. He wasn't going to take no for an answer. This wasn't the first time he'd done that for her, or anyone for that matter. After he walked off, she said, "Steve is always such a gentleman. He always gives up his seat, holds a door, gets someone a chair when no one else does." After she pointed it out, I just couldn't stop noticing it with the years that followed. He always went above and beyond, showing his class and manners. He truly was a gentleman, top-notch all the way. We can all take a page out of Steve's playbook on this one. But before I go too far off the deep end singing his praises about what a gentleman he was, let's not forget the very poorly timed, inappropriate jokes he always told with the wrong company present. Some of these jokes I've heard no less than 100 times, as I'm sure you all have too. Steve had a great sense of humor, and he loved a good joke, which is why I don't understand why he never had any to tell. They were all dirty as can be. I still laughed at them. When Steve would come up to me and say he had a joke, or say, "Hey, have you heard this one?" the first thing I'd do is a clearing turn. Okay, go ahead and tell it. Sorry, I lost my place. There we go. So I'm reminded of a story. It's one that I heard about when Steve was flying a fighter in an air show, and they had him speaking from the cockpit for everyone in attendance to hear. Shelley, in particular, really wanted to make sure this story got told. So I'm going to tell one of Steve's dirty jokes. Remember, in attendance, there were men, women, and small children. He decided it would be a great time for one of his jokes. I'm told the story goes, Steve said over the radio, "I've got a joke. What do you call the cockpit when a woman is flying?" Anybody know? Box office. No one laughed, just like you all didn't now. But Steve needed to make sure everyone heard, so he said it again. It went over about as well as a turd in a punch bowl. There were crickets. Steve's overconfidence in the joke-telling department was not deterred in the least from that event, as he always had an inappropriate joke to tell as long as I've known him. Steve was many things to many people. He was a leader, a businessman, a visionary, a volunteer, a wonderful father, brother, and husband, a warbird pilot extraordinaire, an aviation teacher and student, and most important of all, a friend. We're also truly lucky to have known Steve. We're especially lucky if we could call him a friend. I know he won't be forgotten. None of us sitting here today have to worry about that. I want to wish Steve Godspeed on his new journey as I bid him farewell, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you for leaving us this legacy. Thank you for the knowledge. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for all you've done for the aviation community and the CAF, and thank you for being our friend. Thank you.
Thanks, Dustin. I'd like to invite Chris Rushing up to speak, please. Chris, podium is yours.
So these three friends grew up together, and one of them became a priest, one of them became a teacher, and one of them became a pilot. So as they grew up, they were sitting around one day and they said, you know, when you die and you're sitting in the casket and people come up to you, what do you want to hear? Well, the priest says, I want everyone to know that I serve God, that I serve the community, that I really did what God wanted to do, and I lived my life in Jesus' name. And they said, that's good. So the teacher said, what I want them to hear when everybody is at my casket, I want to hear that I was a great educator, I was a great mentor, and that people are successful because of my teaching and my mentoring, and that I was just a very good educator. So then it came to the pilot, and the pilot says, you know, if I'm going to be honest with you, what I want to hear is, look, he's still moving. So as Dustin said, you know, Steve was a great, somewhat storyteller. I have been told by a colleague that some of his jokes were not so funny. But it was appropriate what Steve did. And, you know, Steve had that can-do attitude, you know, and that's what he presented to himself. And that's the way he wanted to train us. You know, Steve was responsible for a lot of guys in this room for flying warbirds. For me personally, he was responsible for me to be able to fly the Hellcat, and it was through his training that I was able to do that. And you know, if you look around this place and think about the moments that have happened, you know, Steve and Gary started actually with the Condor Squadron, probably something like 30 years ago, when the CAF was down in Van Nuys and they had the China Doll. And so I believe, if I know the story right, that Steve and Gary, they bring the China Doll up here, but obviously they wanted to learn fighters. So they actually got with Frank Elliott, one of the first Condor members, and that's how they started the CAF, is by flying with Frank Elliott with the Condor Squadron. So you think about, well, you know, this place hasn't been here that long, if you really think about it. But if you look at what Steve and Gary and a lot of the other people have done, it's amazing. You know, this beautiful hangar that Steve would work hard and, you know, with the generosity of Cy and Clay and a lot of other people. But it was Steve's vision that really put these moments here. And Steve had a way of keeping you in the moment. I remember one time I was getting my check ride, and I don't remember what it was for, but you know, we were here all morning, and then the check ride was in the early afternoon, and he goes, "Chris, have you eaten anything?" I go, "No, Steve, I can't." And he said, "Boy, go eat." So, Steve, you know where you're at, Steve? You know when he said "boy," that he meant he was serious. So that meant, you know, you better listen to what he said. And that was just the way he, you know, it was just his way he presented himself, that you really respected it and you never really wanted to let him down. I think about the difference between him and Gary, right? Like salt and pepper, right? So if you ever made a mistake or you ever did anything wrong, who would you rather know, Gary or Steve, right? You know, no offense to Gary, but you know, Gary gave us a lot of check rides for formation flights and stuff, and Gary, you know, was very just as forceful and, you know, demanding as Steve. But Steve had that presence that it's hard to put your finger on. Maybe it was his Marine training, but you just never really wanted to let him down. You just really would work especially hard just to satisfy him. And I remember he told me one time, he said, "Chris, why is everybody so nervous when they fly with me?" You know, and I just laughed and I said, "Well, you know, Steve, you just, you know, you hold us to a high standards." And that was something that he lived by as well, because, you know, obviously when the engine popped on the on the Bearcat coming back, and, you know, and he made that very successful landing into Burbank, you know, it was his talents and it was his ability and it was his training that he fell back on, you know, and that's what he always wanted to instill in us, that, you know, he cared about us, and, you know, there was no one more passionate about what we were doing and what he was doing than him. He was always there if you ever needed him. So if you think about the moments that Steve had, and he could keep you in the moment, and, you know, I was reading this morning about what I could say, and I would just encourage everyone to take this moment and think about a moment that you had with Steve, because a lot of times all we do is think about the future, and we're trying to plan what we're doing this week, and we seem to lose the wonderful thing of just today, you know, the moment of today. And I think that's what Steve could do with us, is keep us in that moment. If we were going to go flying for a check ride or do a flight, Steve had that ability to keep you in that moment, to keep you from thinking about all of the distractions that we would have. You know, he would say, "Go off to yourself, think about, you know, make sure you eat." He was just really just a super guy. And what he has done in the CAF in just this short period of time is just truly, truly remarkable. And, you know, I know he's gone way too soon, But like I said, just take that special moment that you have with Steve and cherish it, lock it in your heart, and just keep that moment. And just always remember, when you walk around this place, that you're never going to walk alone, that Steve will be with you in that moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. I'd like to bring up Steve's brother, Gary. Gary?
Well, not being as good a speaker as the previous two are, just give you a couple of things that happened with Steve and myself. And first of all, thank you all for coming. Steve would bugs. He would be happy that you're all here. He was a Marine, served in Vietnam for 2 years. He had a lot of, as a young Marine, had a lot of battle stories, but we won't bring those up. I'd like to tell you about an early battle that we had. We lived in Holland, Michigan. He was about 3 years old, and I was 14, something like that. I had a motorbike, and I used to take Steve for a ride. I'd set him on the tank, and he'd hold on to the handlebars, and we'd go riding. This was after a heavy snowstorm, but it was nice, and the roads had been plowed, and so they want to go for a ride. Yeah. So he I hopped him on, and we're going along, and it's got to go real slow around corners. So I came to a T in the road, and I got real slow, and I started turning, and it just slid, hit the snowbank, and threw him off, tipped me off. I got the bike hooked up to Steve, and all I hear him giggle. Look, where are you, Steve? And giggle. So I just frantically dug in the snow and got a leg. Oh, and he's still giggling. He thought that was fun. So that's about the way he was. Not too much bothered him. And up a few years, he was about 17, I guess, when I flew an avion back to the World's Fair in 1964, and we stopped for gas in Dallas, Texas, and we were wandering around, and we saw in a hangar a CAF P-51, and we were saying, hey, that's a beautiful airplane, and Steve says, I'd like to fly one of those someday. And I said, sure. So, and so you go up a few more years, about 1990. He had a friend down in Van Nuys who had a couple of P-51s, and he said, you suppose you could check my brother and I out in the 51? He says, sure. He says, sure. How much T6 time do you have? 0. So he said, well, my insurance says you gotta have 200 hours, so, when you get it, come on back. So, okay, so we're dejected coming down the freeway, and we see old 290 taxiing out here. Whoa, a T6. So off ramp and on and down the side streets, and we got over here, and here's this lean-to hangar, and wow, CAF. Oh, well, okay. So Russ Rosendahl was our wing leader then, and we said, how can we fly the T6? And he gave the old talk. He says, we don't have a flying club here, son. And as an aside, I use that term a lot of times as an operations officer. But he says, what can you do for us? So Steve was a good wrench, so, and I was not too bad in those days. And we started going, and we got checked out in T6. And so then Steve got interested in fighters, and he found an F8 down in Van Nuys, not in Van Nuys, well, that he heard was they belonged to the CAF. So we started working on that, and he got it up here. And anyway, one thing led to another, and we got checked out in it. We were in one of the three buildings that Steve envisioned when we were in that damn lean-to hangar. I mean, it was ridiculous. We had to shove the Bearcat back in as far as we could and cover it because it was just a covered hangar. It was built to bring a C-47 in to change the engines or work on the engines. It was just a cover over it. And it was a lot of fun. So with his vision and a hell of a lot of help from some gentlemen that we have here today, and this hangar is almost entirely from Cy and Betty Robbins. And the other two hangars, our first hangars, were Clay Lacey and Bob Reese and Russ Rosendahl and several other smaller contributors. We really, really do appreciate it because these are beautiful. And it's a monument to Steve's determination. He was a Marine, you know, determined. In closing, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'm sure happy to see you here.
Thank you, Gary. Steve's son, Stephen, where are you? Would you come up and say something for us?
Well, this sucks. Thanks everybody for coming out here. Like was said previously, I know he'd be very proud. I promised myself it wouldn't be this quick, but sorry. This was one of the hardest things to come up with and find out about what exactly I wanted to talk about. There's so much. Yeah. Well, I'm as good as I'm going to be. Like everyone here, everyone's had just a unique relationship with my dad. And Chris, when he made the comment, boy, and that came out of your mouth, I started looking around. A lot of you folks in here have known my dad for many years. A lot of you have flown with him for many years. I started flying with my dad when I was just a couple months old. About 43 years ago, he flew me out here from Michigan in the back of a 182 in a cardboard box. I was just a couple months old. I was in the back seat. It wasn't like Amazon. But after that flight, I've had quite a few wonderful moments with him. And the last flight I had with him was on August 25th, 2019. And I remember it because we were just getting ready to go to Reno, and he was starting to have problems with his foot, and he couldn't retract it, and it was pissing him off. And he called me up and said, "I need you to come out to the hangar with me." Okay, what are we doing now? And about 15 minutes after being in his hangar, I ended up getting a chunk of 2x4 that he had me duct tape around the rudder pedal, just so that he could put his feet on it. And it was one of those things that felt surreal because I knew that if I was doing it and he was monitoring my actions, he'd think I was crazy. But when it was my dad, it was like, okay, whatever you want to do, we'll do it. And he said, well, now I want to go test it. And I said, okay. So we jumped in the Baron and flew around the county for a little while, and he felt pretty confident that he could fly again and get his feet situated. And I just remember thinking, this guy's got duct tape with the 2x4 on his rudder pedal. This might be a gnarly landing. And I just remember being blown away because it was probably the best one I've ever been on. Say what you want about him, but he had talent. I was so lucky as his son. I remember having so many people walk up and meet me for the first time, and one of the first things that they would always tell me is, how lucky are you that you're Steve Barber's son? And I used to go, you're out of your freaking mind. You don't know my dad like I know my dad. And they used to think that it was so cool, and they were right. My dad was super cool. I was a lucky young boy. I got to hang out with my hero my whole childhood. I went to so many air shows. I couldn't even guess how many air shows I've been to. But my sister and I used to always stand there and look and point and go, that's our dad, that's our dad. And finally it got to be too much where people would say, we know, we know, we know. That's probably him telling me to shut up. At the age of 15, I had, outside of meeting my wife and having kids that I love and adore, the best day of my life was at the airport with my dad. I was probably a little over 15, and we were at Minter for an air show, and the sky was beautiful. There were clouds that were scattered everywhere, and my dad was pretty green in the Bearcat, It hadn't been that much long since that thing was airborne, probably about a year and a half, and we were at the air show, and it was Friday, and the air show had shut down, and the clouds were just beautiful. And he came up and he said, "I got an idea. You want to go for a Mustang ride?" And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Yeah. Who doesn't want to go for a Mustang ride?" I'd never been in a Mustang before. And for about 40 minutes, his buddy took me up, and we got to play Follow the Leader with my dad in the Bearcat through the clouds. And today, I can't top that with my kids. I mean, I'll never forget that day. It was amazing. We were doing rolls around the clouds. It was just symbolic for me following my dad my whole life. I was proud to do that. I'm still proud to do that. But along Dustin's line, my dad was inappropriate. And he said a lot of stuff that a lot of people were a little shocked, but if you knew him, it improved your day to feel that shocked whenever he opened his mouth. It was a lot of fun. I've had a lot of great flights with my dad, like I've said. One in particular was out at this airport, and it was probably a little over a decade ago. My grandparents on my mother's side had both passed away when I was real young, and my dad had scattered the ashes over the ocean of my grandpa, and then when my grandmother passed, he had promised my aunt and my mom that he would do the same. So here we are in Jim Basso Cessna, and he said, "Come on, son." We had our memorial, and we're gonna jump in the airplane and go for a flight over the ocean. Okay, Dad. My dad's flying, and my aunt's in the right seat, and I'm in the back. And like today, dressed in dark clothing, and I had this silk shirt on, and my aunt had opened up the window and tilted the ashes out, and it went all over my face. I had it in my mouth. I had it in my eyelashes. My shirt was now gray. And he didn't stop laughing from Ventura until we got out of the aircraft. And he looked at me, and he just bent over laughing at me, and I was just mortified. But to him, I'm just lucky to see him laugh like that. My dad meant a lot to a lot of people, and to everyone who knew him. He was a special man. When LaTanya and I went back to Texas for his inductee into the CAF Hall of Fame, I was up at the podium and broke down like I'm breaking down now. And it's just pure pride. I can assure you, no one has ever disagreed with him more than me. And he is stubborn, and he was stubborn, and I'm just glad that that's just another trait that I follow of him. He was funny, he was smart, he was so well read it would piss you off. He would try to debate with him, and he would ask you for your facts, and I hated that because I couldn't bullshit him. And my dad was courageous. He was pretty brave. And he was strong inside and out. He didn't look like much sometimes, but I'll just give you two quick stories. When I was 17, I had brought the recruiter home, and I had asked my dad to sign for me. And his first words weren't what I had expected. I thought my dad would have been ready to wash his hands of me, and he did what the recruiter should have done, and he wanted to make sure that I was making the best decision. And about 5 minutes later, he was signing his name on the contract, and I was getting ready to go to boot camp. And I know I'm no model, but I was a lot heavier at 17. And I had put up a pull-up bar in the lattice overhang in our backyard, and I was trying to get my pull-ups in before going to boot camp. And I was having a hard time one day, and I was frustrated. And he had just come home from work, and he had a button-down shirt with a tie on, and was wondering what was wrong with me. And I just told him, I'm having a hard time. I'm fat, I'm weak, I need to do these pull-ups or I'm not gonna be able to get in the Marine Corps. And he said, just make the choice, son. Make the choice that you're gonna do it, and do it. And I remember looking at him being so frustrated, like, who are you to tell me to make a choice and just do it? I'm not capable of magic. And he said, if you just make up your mind that you're gonna do it, you'll do it. And I looked at him, and he was probably 50 years old, maybe 48. And I looked at him, and I just didn't care about what he said, because there was no way he could relate to me. And he could tell that I was judging him, and he took his tie off, and he jumped up, and he banged out like 9 of them. Boom, boom, boom. And I remember going, oh my God. Today's not the day to challenge him. And he was a sleeper. My dad was a sleeper. My dad used to confuse people with the things that he was able to do, the things that he would say, the things that he had experienced, and you would find out about it, or like his brother said, I mean, there's stories that don't need to be told about him, and you never knew it because he was just a good man. And he was human. My dad was human. He wasn't the perfect man, but he was just what I needed in my life. And I think I'll just close on I hear people talk about legacy for him, and Chris, you mentioned it, my uncle, and everybody that's flown with him in this room has talked about a certain legacy that he's provided folks in an organization and families. I mean, I met my wife here, and I have 3 wonderful kids because of him inundating me into this family of the CAF and aviation. So it's impossible to say that he didn't change people's life. It's impossible. But back to the legacy comment, I think that if my dad were here, I've spent a lot of time with him, and I was fortunate enough to have a lot of conversations with him. And I know that what he would want you to know is that this place is much bigger than just him. And it's much bigger than his choices or the things that he's done. It's because of you, the people that know him, that have cared about him. And more importantly, it's because of the people in here that were looking downfield with him when he came up with an idea and said that he wanted to do something. I think the true legacy is in all of you that helped him achieve that. And I want to thank you, and I want to let you know that even if he wasn't tactful all the time, he cared about you all and he loved you. Thank you for being here.